It began with a quiet adjustment buried deep inside a royal registry, one so subtle most palace aides missed it entirely. But when Prince Edward suddenly stepped forward during a private Windsor gathering and confirmed Meghan's role had been quietly revised, the silence across the room reportedly turned icy. What looked like another harmless administrative update was, according to insiders, something far more devastating. Because this was not just about protocol anymore. It was about erasure. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the change appeared almost invisible. No public announcement. No dramatic statement from Buckingham Palace. No official declaration printed across front pages in London. And yet, according to reports circulating through royal administrative circles, Meghan's name had quietly begun disappearing from discussions that once included her automatically. Palace insiders whispered that ceremonial planning documents had been altered months earlier. Invitations connected to future institutional strategy were reportedly redirected. Even internal communication streams tied to Commonwealth representation allegedly shifted without explanation. What made the situation even more unsettling was not the adjustment itself, but the silence surrounding it. Royal aides were reportedly instructed not to discuss the matter publicly, creating what one media commentator described as an atmosphere of controlled disappearance. And inside an institution built on symbolism, silence often speaks louder than outrage ever could. Prince Edward's alleged confirmation changed everything, because he was never viewed as a reckless figure within the monarchy. For decades, he had operated quietly behind the scenes, earning a reputation among royal observers as one of the most disciplined and cautious members of the family. That was why insiders claim his acknowledgement carried extraordinary weight. Reports suggest the Duke of Edinburgh did not present the shift as punishment or revenge. Instead, according to various interpretations of the gathering, he framed it as an institutional adjustment tied to the monarchy's evolving structure. But the reality felt far colder than those carefully chosen words. Because if Meghan's role could be quietly reduced without public confrontation, then it suggested something far more powerful was unfolding beneath the surface. An organized effort to redefine who truly belonged within the operational future of the crown. As speculation intensified, palace corridors reportedly filled with competing theories. Some insiders claimed the decision had been finalized long ago during private consultations involving senior royal advisors. Others suggested the process accelerated after a series of media appearances and public projects connected to Harry and Meghan drew renewed frustration from the old guard surrounding the monarchy. According to royal commentators, there had been growing concern for months about the damage ongoing family tensions were causing to public trust in the institution. And within that atmosphere, the palace allegedly began moving toward what sources described as a coordinated institutional withdrawal. Not an explosive exile, not a public humiliation, something quieter, more surgical, a gradual shrinking of influence until the role itself no longer carried operational meaning. What made the moment even more explosive was the reported support from Prince William and Princess Catherine behind closed doors. Neither future king nor future queen publicly addressed the rumors. Yet according to insiders familiar with internal discussions, both were said to favor a tighter monarchy centered exclusively around active senior royals. That interpretation alone sent shockwaves through Britain's media establishment. Because for years, speculation surrounding Harry and Meghan focused on whether reconciliation remained possible. But now commentators were beginning to ask a far darker question. Had the palace already accepted permanent separation as inevitable? Reports suggest William had grown increasingly protective over the monarchy's future, particularly as King Charles continued navigating serious health concerns. Catherine, meanwhile, was allegedly viewed as a stabilizing force, determined to shield the next generation from continuing institutional chaos. Together, according to palace whispers, they represented a future built on discipline, control, and carefully guarded loyalty. Outside the palace, the public reaction became deeply divided. Supporters of Meghan viewed the reports as another example of quiet exclusion carried out behind aristocratic walls. Critics, however, argued the monarchy had simply reached a breaking point after years of public conflict and fractured trust. Media insiders claimed broadcasters were suddenly scrambling to confirm details that royal aides refused to clarify directly. The palace's refusal to issue a definitive denial only fueled further speculation across Britain. And as more commentators began discussing the possibility of Meghan's long-term removal from meaningful royal influence, the atmosphere surrounding the monarchy reportedly grew heavier by the day. Because this no longer looked like a temporary family dispute. It looked like the early stages of an institutional reset. Yet according to those closest to the situation, the removal itself was only the surface of the crisis, because hidden beneath it was a much larger operation already unfolding inside the monarchy. For years, the world believed Meghan still carried a symbolic connection to the monarchy despite stepping away from royal duties. Yet according to palace administrative whispers, that connection may have been shrinking piece by piece long before the public ever noticed. And by the time Prince Edward reportedly acknowledged the truth, insiders claimed the process was already complete. The strangest part was how quietly it happened. There was no thunderous palace statement. No dramatic removal splashed across official pages. No single moment where the door appeared to close. Instead, reports suggest Meghan's place inside the royal machine faded through smaller signs, fewer references, fewer consultations, fewer ceremonial discussions where her name once might have appeared. On paper, the title remained. In public memory, the association remained. But inside the hidden machinery of the monarchy, insiders claim something far more important was being withdrawn: access. That was the chilling difference between symbolic status and real authority. A title can survive long after power has vanished. A name can remain attached to history while the institution quietly moves on without it. And according to royal commentators, that is what made this alleged shift so devastating. Meghan may still have carried a public connection to the House of Windsor, but reports claim she was no longer being treated as part of its working future. Invitations connected to strategy were reportedly reduced. Internal conversations involving ceremonial planning allegedly moved forward without Sussex involvement. Even Commonwealth-related discussions, once central to Meghan and Harry's early royal image, were said to have become increasingly closed to them. Inside palace circles, Prince Edward was reportedly seen as the careful figure watching over this transition. Not loud, not emotional, not seeking revenge. Instead, insiders described him as a guardian of the fine print, the quiet royal who understood that institutions do not always change through speeches. Sometimes they change through registers, access lists, planning documents, and the deliberate absence of a name. That is why his reported acknowledgement carried such force. It did not sound like gossip. It sounded like confirmation that the monarchy had already chosen a new boundary, and behind that boundary was a larger question: who now had the right to represent royal authority? Palace figures were allegedly redefining that answer with increasing firmness. Working royals meant working royals. Duty meant presence. Representation meant discipline, restraint, and service under the crown's rules. For supporters of Harry and Meghan, this felt harsh, even cruel. But for critics, it looked inevitable after years of interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and public accusations that had shaken trust across the institution. The tension reportedly grew because the monarchy was no longer just managing a family disagreement. It was protecting its own survival. Every new media project connected to the Sussexes reopened old wounds. Every headline overseas became another reminder that royal association could still create global impact, even without active royal service. And for an institution obsessed with control, that was a dangerous imbalance. So the palace allegedly chose a colder path, not confrontation, not spectacle, streamlining, a smaller monarchy, a tighter circle, a future where symbolic connection no longer guaranteed institutional influence. And while the public focused on headlines overseas, a far colder battle was allegedly taking shape inside the palace walls themselves. The most revealing part of the entire situation may not have been Prince Edward's confirmation, but the silence from Prince William and Princess Catherine afterward. Because according to insiders, that silence was interpreted inside royal circles as agreement. And in the monarchy, silence can carry more power than any public statement ever could. After the reported adjustment to Meghan's royal role began spreading through palace circles, many expected some kind of reaction from the Prince and Princess of Wales. A denial. A soft correction. A careful reminder that family bonds still mattered. But none came. And according to insiders, that absence was not accidental. It was read as a message. William and Catherine were not rushing to reopen the door, not publicly questioning the decision, and not distancing themselves from the palace's quieter strategy. Their silence became its own declaration, cold and controlled, suggesting that the future king and queen may have already accepted a harsher truth. The monarchy could not move forward while still being pulled backward by unresolved conflict. Reports suggest William had grown increasingly convinced that the crown needed stricter boundaries after years of damaging headlines, emotional interviews, public accusations, and private wounds turned into global spectacle. To him, according to palace whispers, this was no longer simply about Harry and Meghan. It was about the survival of the institution he would one day inherit. Every public controversy carried a cost. Every fresh media storm forced the palace to defend itself against narratives it could not fully answer. And for William, that pattern allegedly created one unavoidable conclusion. Royal access could no longer be based on blood alone. It had to be earned through duty, restraint, and trust. Catherine's position, insiders claim, was quieter but no less powerful. She reportedly favored stability, dignity, and duty-first optics, especially for the sake of the next generation. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were growing up inside a monarchy already under pressure from public scrutiny, family division, and changing national expectations. Palace aides allegedly feared that continued drama could surround their childhood with uncertainty, forcing them to inherit not just crowns and titles, but emotional wreckage. Catherine, according to royal observers, understood that the future of the family depended on calm, not softness, not surrender. Calm with steel beneath it. That is why her growing influence inside palace operations became so significant after King Charles's health concerns placed new weight on William's shoulders. Sources claim Catherine was no longer just seen as a supportive royal figure, but as a central stabilizing presence within the future structure of the crown. She represented continuity without chaos, sympathy without weakness, and tradition without public bitterness. And in that atmosphere, any path back for Harry and Meghan reportedly became narrower, more conditional, and far more difficult than before. Royal experts began speaking of a tighter inner circle, one shaped around active service and unquestioned loyalty. Prince Edward's careful confirmation may have exposed the administrative side of the shift, but William and Catherine's silence revealed the emotional reality behind it. The palace was not simply removing names from lists. It was drawing a line around the monarchy's future. But the deeper shock came when insiders began connecting Meghan's removal to an even larger shift happening around King Charles himself. Reports suggest King Charles never wanted the conflict to reach this point. But as pressure intensified around the future of the monarchy, insiders whisper that the king found himself trapped between personal affection and institutional survival. And according to several interpretations of recent palace meetings, duty was beginning to win. For Charles, the situation was reportedly painful in a way no palace document could soften. This was not merely a matter of schedules, titles, or ceremonial access. It was family. It was history. It was a father looking at the ruins of trust and realizing that affection alone could no longer hold the structure together. Sources close to royal discussions suggest the king had grown exhausted by years of emotional fractures, especially while facing his own health struggles. Every argument seemed to arrive at the worst possible moment. Every headline reopened old wounds. And every attempt at calm reportedly carried the same impossible question. How could he protect his son without weakening the crown? Inside the firm, palace insiders claim senior royals began pushing for a clearer line between honorary association and active duty. The monarchy, they argued, could not continue living in a gray area where those outside the working structure still appeared connected to its influence. To some, this felt ruthless. To others, it was survival. Because if royal authority could be borrowed without royal responsibility, then the institution risked looking confused at the very moment it needed discipline most. Charles, according to several interpretations, understood the danger. He may not have wanted a freeze-out. He may not have wanted public pain. But he also knew the crown could not keep absorbing private heartbreak as public damage. That was where Prince Edward's role reportedly became more important. Insiders described him as a stabilizing figure during sensitive internal discussions, someone able to speak the language of loyalty without turning it into spectacle. He was not seen as the loud enforcer. He was the careful keeper of procedure, the one who could make a painful decision appear administrative rather than personal. And in a monarchy built on precedent, that mattered. If Meghan's role had to be reduced, it had to be done without appearing vindictive. If the Sussex connection had to be narrowed, it had to be framed as modernization, not revenge. Royal commentators began comparing the moment to earlier restructures under Queen Elizabeth II, when the institution quietly adjusted itself to survive changing times. The late Queen understood that monarchy was not preserved through emotion alone. It was preserved through order, restraint, and the hard discipline of knowing when sentiment had to step aside. Reports suggest Charles found himself surrounded by that same lesson, only now it was his burden to carry. He reportedly sought to avoid humiliation while still allowing institutional changes to move forward. A softer hand outside, a firmer grip inside. And beneath it all, speculation grew that future coronation-era roles, ceremonial invitations, and family placements were already being reconsidered privately. Reconciliation remained emotionally tempting, but constitutional practicality was closing the door inch by inch. The king was caught between love and legacy, and inside that brutal space, the monarchy began choosing its future. And then came the moment that reportedly transformed quiet restructuring into what insiders now describe as a royal freeze-out. What happened next reportedly stunned even longtime palace staff. Because according to administrative whispers and media speculation, Meghan's removal was not announced with a dramatic confrontation. Instead, it unfolded through silence, vanished access, and invisible walls quietly closing from every direction at once. Reports suggest the first sign came through reduced coordination between Sussex representatives and palace offices. Messages that once might have received careful handling allegedly slowed. Planning channels reportedly became narrower. Discussions that involved future ceremonies moved forward without the same expectation of Sussex involvement. And inside that quiet shift, insiders claim the palace was sending a message without ever saying the words aloud. The connection was no longer operational. It still existed in public memory, still carried emotional weight, still sparked debate across the world. But within the machinery of the crown, it was being treated as something distant, delicate, and increasingly restricted. Palace insiders described it not as punishment, but as institutional distancing. That phrase sounded polite, almost harmless, but its meaning was brutal. It suggested that the monarchy had found a way to step back without staging a confrontation. No explosive decree. No public stripping of dignity. No official door slam shut. Instead, certain invitations allegedly became uncertain. Certain ceremonial discussions reportedly became closed. Certain future appearances were whispered to be under review before they were ever placed on a calendar. It was the kind of slow freeze only an ancient institution could perform. Graceful on the surface, merciless underneath. For Harry, the consequences were reportedly just as painful. Royal observers claimed he was now facing a harder path through the family than at any point before. If Meghan's role had been quietly reduced, then his own standing became more complicated by association. Every attempt at private repair had to pass through deeper layers of mistrust. Every possible reunion carried the shadow of old interviews, old accusations, and old wounds that never fully healed. Sources suggested that some family members still held emotional concern for him, but concern was no longer the same as access. Love, in the language of monarchy, did not automatically restore position. Prince Edward's presence during this transition reportedly became increasingly important. He was not presented as a public executioner, but as a quiet and decisive figure who understood how royal systems protect themselves. Where others might have argued emotionally, Edward allegedly worked through order, precedent, and controlled language. That made the freeze-out harder to challenge because it did not look like a personal attack. It looked like procedure. It looked like reform. It looked like the crown simply adjusting its own internal map. Outside the palace, the debate erupted with force. Some saw the move as necessary discipline after years of damaging public conflict. Others saw it as a cold rejection of family unity, at the very moment reconciliation was most needed. Sympathy split down the middle, institutional loyalty on one side, emotional forgiveness on the other. But the palace appeared unmoved by the noise, because by then the question had changed. It was no longer whether Meghan could return to symbolic relevance. It was whether the monarchy would allow any outside force to shape its future again. But according to those closest to the palace, the final stage of this transformation was never really about Meghan alone. It was about the monarchy preparing for its next era. Behind the velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace, insiders claim a new royal order is already taking shape. One centered on fewer voices, tighter control, and a future designed to survive modern chaos. And in that future, reports suggest there may no longer be space for half-in, half-out royalty. This was the deeper meaning behind the alleged removal. It was not just about one name fading from internal discussions or one royal connection being quietly narrowed. It was about the crown deciding what kind of institution it wanted to become after years of pressure, scandal, illness, and emotional fracture. Reports suggest William and Catherine are increasingly viewed inside palace circles as the future operational center of the monarchy, not merely as popular public figures, but as the disciplined core around which the next reign will be built. Their image, their choices, and their silence are reportedly being treated as part of a larger strategy: fewer distractions, fewer competing narratives, and fewer people able to pull the monarchy into private storms. Prince Edward and Princess Anne, according to insiders, have become part of that same stabilizing force. Anne represents iron duty, the old discipline, the belief that service must come before comfort. Edward represents quiet procedure, the careful handling of the fine print, the calm removal of confusion before it becomes crisis. Together, they allegedly help reinforce an internal message that is becoming harder to ignore: royal status is no longer enough. Only active duty counts, only service protects access. Only loyalty keeps a person close to the beating heart of the institution. That shift has reportedly made Meghan's reduced role feel inevitable to critics and deeply unfair to supporters. For those who defend her, the quiet removal appears cold, another sign that the palace can protect itself while leaving emotional damage behind. But for those who side with the institution, the decision looks like a necessary correction after years of public tension and blurred boundaries. The monarchy, they argue, cannot survive as a half-open door, where people outside the working structure still carry influence without responsibility. And inside the palace, that argument is said to be winning. The fear, insiders claim, is fragmentation. A monarchy split into rival centers of attention. A family where every disagreement becomes content, every wound becomes headline material, and every private fracture threatens public trust. That is why the move toward a smaller, more controlled structure has gained force. It promises discipline. It promises clarity. It promises a future where the crown speaks with one voice, even if that voice is colder than many hoped. Yet Harry's place remains the unresolved shadow in the story. If Meghan's role has allegedly been reduced, where does that leave the king's younger son? Can blood reopen doors that trust has closed? Can affection survive when the machinery of monarchy has already moved on? These questions continue to grow because the palace has not offered emotional closure. It has offered structure. And in that structure, many observers hear the echo of Queen Elizabeth II's long-standing belief: duty first, restraint always, the crown above personal pain. Yet even after the quiet removal, one haunting question still lingered across Britain. Was this truly the end, or only the beginning of an even greater royal reckoning? As Meghan's royal role reportedly faded into silence, attention suddenly shifted toward Prince Harry himself. Because according to royal observers, he now stands at the center of an impossible crossroads, caught between the life he built abroad and the institution that shaped him since birth. For Harry, the alleged removal was more than an administrative blow aimed at Meghan. It struck at the painful heart of his own position. He was still the king's son, still Diana's youngest boy in the eyes of millions, still a man whose entire identity had been formed under the weight of royal expectation. Yet reports suggest his relationship with senior royals remains deeply strained, wrapped in years of hurt, mistrust, and words that could not easily be taken back. Every path toward reconciliation now seemed to carry conditions. Every private conversation, if it happened at all, reportedly came shadowed by doubt. Speculation grew over whether attempts at healing had failed again and again behind closed doors. Some insiders claimed Charles remained emotionally torn, unable to close his heart to his son even as the institution around him demanded stricter boundaries. But William, according to palace whispers, was far less willing to move quickly. To the future king, trust was not a sentimental gift. It was something broken in public and therefore something that could not be repaired in secret overnight. Years of interviews, accusations, and explosive revelations had reportedly hardened the atmosphere between the brothers, leaving affection buried beneath a wall of caution. That made Harry's situation uniquely tragic. In California, he had built an independent life with Meghan and their children, a life shaped by freedom, distance, and personal reinvention. But in Britain, his name still carried royal history. Some believed healing was still possible, arguing that no monarchy could remain emotionally whole while one of the king's sons remained distant. Others insisted the damage had gone too far, and that the crown could no longer risk confusion over who represented it. Between those arguments stood Harry, carrying the burden of blood, love, resentment, and legacy. And as the monarchy moved quietly forward, the final consequence of Meghan's removal became impossible to ignore. In the end, there was no dramatic announcement, no balcony confrontation, no official declaration of exile. According to insiders, that was precisely the point. Meghan's royal role did not reportedly end with noise, it ended with silence. The kind of silence only ancient institutions truly know how to wield. Prince Edward's reported confirmation became the first real acknowledgement of a shift many had whispered about for months. Until then, it had lived in hints, absences, and careful palace language. A missing name here, a reduced invitation there, a quieter tone whenever Sussex questions surfaced. But once Edward allegedly recognized that the role had been revised, the speculation hardened into something far more serious. The monarchy, it seemed, was not simply reacting to controversy. It was building distance with discipline. Palace insiders claimed the focus now was stability, continuity, and public confidence. After years of emotional storms, the crown appeared determined to move forward with fewer distractions and clearer lines. William and Catherine stood at the center of that future, not just as heirs, but as symbols of a monarchy trying to protect itself from further fracture. Their strength was not loud. It was controlled. It was measured. It was the kind of power that waits, watches, and then quietly reshapes the room. For Harry and Meghan, the message was painfully clear. They remained globally recognized, endlessly discussed, and deeply tied to public fascination. But inside the operational structure of the firm, reports suggest they were increasingly viewed as outside the circle. Not forgotten, not erased from history, but separated from influence. Royal insiders described it as institutional separation, not emotional closure. And that distinction made the wound even sharper, because emotional bonds may still exist, but the machinery of monarchy had already begun moving without them. Still, questions remain. Can a father and son truly repair what the institution has already restricted? Can private forgiveness survive public division? Can Meghan ever return to any meaningful royal space, or has the quiet door already closed for good? The public will keep watching because the Sussex story still carries drama, pain, loyalty, and betrayal in equal measure. Yet the final lesson feels colder than any headline. The monarchy may bend for sentiment, but it does not build its future around uncertainty. It chooses order. It chooses control. It chooses preservation over personal longing. Because within the House of Windsor, insiders whisper that affection may bend, loyalty may fracture, and public opinion may shift like the tide, but the crown itself always protects its survival first. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.